Norm's interest in mushrooms extends back to the first grade, when he drew pictures of them in the art book he made.
It's like 10 years.
I used to draw pictures. I can associate with this. His fungal fascinations have gone through photographic, taxonomic, culinary phases, but what he finds most satisfying is wandering through the woods and plucking interesting, tangible things from the forest floor. For him, morel hunting is the most alluring of the fungal hunts because of the fresh start every year and the enigmatic nature of the quarry. I forgot I was going to draw this picture of this mushroom, which is one of the ones I took it from his first grade book, but I forgot to bring it. Norman Andresen.
Well, I guess you can guess what we're going to talk about tonight, and don't feel any trepidation about interrupting me or asking me questions. Up on the screen, what we have is a picture of some of the latest studies of trying to sort out the various species of mushrooms. And you can see there's morels are a very diverse group, species-wise, but as far as their morphology or shapes, they're all pretty similar, and their edibility is pretty similar. So there does seem to be a distinct. Let me see if I can do this right here. Ooh. Basically, some of the recent studies have basically used DNA and isolated them into two main groups: basically the white morels, or the esculentos, and the alatos, or the black morels. And you can see there's dozens and dozens of different species there, and for the average hunter, it's not going to make any difference to you. And one of the interesting things is this is the United States and North America, about 60 million years ago. And one of the studies I was reading suggests that this is the time period when the white morels separated from the black morels. And the West Coast tended to have the black fire morels, and then the East Coast has most of the white morels that are more associated with hardwoods and tend to be more perennial in the woods, where the West Coast morels, the black morels, tend to be more into disturbance. They're like forest fires, fallen trees, logging, all kinds of good stuff. But you can see there's a good reason why these might have separated into two groups. And some of the studies show that there's overlap between these areas, and the Western North America has the biggest diversity of the elotoclade, and they think that these arose in North America from a progenitor that is similar to our local morel, which is the little Rufiburnia, and that seems to be not common but existent worldwide, and that may have been the original species that both the white and the black morels came out of. And for a long time there was a lot of discussion about how do morels make their living, and it's getting more and more clear that they really are mycorrhizal, with conifers, hardwoods, quite a variety of things. And mycorrhizal is basically the roots are in a sort of trading relationship with various plants, where the actual mushroom mycelium is encapsulating the root tip and exchanging for various things: water, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And in exchange, the tree can give as much as 25% of its sugar that it creates. So this must be a very, very useful thing for the tree to have this association. And there's been a lot of suggestion that trees have a lot of choice about who they choose. So there's competition between mushrooms at the root tip level as to who gets the root tips. And it kind of suggests why we have some years that are good for candy caps, some years are good for chanterelles. It's who gets hold of those root tips in time. And morels, they seem to be there all the time in the places where they fruit. And but there's a big turnover when their host dies. And what's going on there, and no one really knows. It's probably they're eating the host's roots, or they're somehow profiting by this situation. And definitely the fire morels like the fact that there's a change in pH, kills competition. They're not very successful above 50 degrees in competing with the soil bacteria. So they generally like places that get cold. They can grow very fast in conditions that are essentially below freezing or at freezing. And you might have heard Ken Leachfield speak. This is basically the morels that he's grown. Basically, this is just cultures. And they're very easy to grow in culture. Very difficult, or impossible at this point, to get them to fruit. And they have kind of an interesting lifestyle, which they have actually a storage organ, a sclerotia. And apparently the mycelium can make these sclerotia endlessly and not fruit. But there's some circumstance that makes a sclerotia then, once it's created, produce a morel fruit body. And it seems to happen around some sort of disturbance in our area. In the East Coast morels, it seems to be just sort of a regular process that goes on every spring, like a lot of mycorrhizal mushrooms. And this looks like devastation. You know, in the 60s, this would have been the worst possible situation. You know, people, oh, forest fires, Smokey the Bear, all that good stuff. But to a morel hunter, this looks like heaven. Some may look like hell, but this is just a perfect habitat to find really nice morels. It's a burnt forest. They've got this night disturbance. It's killed most of the small trees. Yet some of the higher trees may not have died. And you've got this nice dappled sunlight where it's protected from the wind, so it has relatively good humidity. Yet there's a lot of food. The ground cover there is all the needles that have fallen off the trees. So it wasn't too catastrophic a fire. It killed the trees, but the needles fell off. They're covering the ground, more food, and also keeps some moisture in the soil. So this is just, looks really good.
So, how,
Go ahead.
does it take a year or more than 1 year after a fire before the morels will come up?
It's usually the spring following the disturbance, at least in our area. And I know there's some talk that the second year is better than the first year, but I really believe the first year is the best, and then it sort of tapers off after that. And if it doesn't fruit the first year, I don't think it ever gets as prolific as the first year would be. The sclerotia goes through the cycle, and it just makes more sclerotia. This is kind of an interesting fire that we're probably familiar with. This is the Tahoe fire that was right by,
South Tahoe?
what's that?
South Tahoe?
It's yeah. This is the Angora fire.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look down, it's looking from up above, but you look at the interesting thing is you've got this really heavily burnt area that has the chaparral or the manzanita there. That's probably not going to be very good. But if you look out in the distance, you can see how the trees are underburnt, some are living, some are dead. And those are really, can be really good habitats if you get moisture in there at the right time. Because this really moisture and temperature are really important. This is-
Norm, if
yeah.
they're mycorrhizal and all the trees are dead in that area, how can they grow?
I'm sorry?
If you say they're mycorrhizal, but all the trees in the area are dead, what are they feeding off of? Which roots?
They may be consuming the roots. You know, there's a whole class of fungi that basically invade wood or plants and just wait. And then when the tree dies, they're in position to take over. And it can be as small as a leaf. There can be a number of endophytes in there, or it can be on the woody surface or logs also. And, so this could be kind of a dual relationship with the trees. They're happily growing along in a mycorrhizal relationship, and then they sort of turn on their host when the untoward happens to the poor tree. And this right here is a demonstration of when they do control burns or forest fires. You'll often find this situation where the Forest Service stops the fire right on the road, so it's incredibly convenient for morels. You have to really laud it for that, you know. That's foresight. I love it. But it's beautiful forest. Here we've got some incense cedar and some firs, and they're nice underburnt. You can actually see that they're still alive up above, but they've lost all the bottom needles. All the small trees are killed. This is a really nice looking habitat. This doesn't look as nice, but this can also be a really great habitat. The slash, I mean, it looks really horrible, but if you get out there, what's going on is you have this nice solar exposure, yet you've got this covering that keeps it from drying out. And all the complexity there, the logs and such, they allow the morels to grow up in these nice little humid pockets. They get the nice sun, shines down on them. So, you know, you can go out there and spend, you know, a whole day picking in an area that we can just see right here, you know. Can be very exciting. Yeah, of course you get totally sunburned and it's incredibly hot. But it's very nice when you do it. One of the things you may want to do is when you're looking for moreling is you can see on the web they've got a bunch of maps like this, and basically they give you the entire area of one particular forest fire or another. And this is actually on a topo map, so you get some idea of what the altitudes are. And the important things on these nice topo maps is you can start looking at things like north-facing slopes, south-facing slopes, the ridge tops, and start coordinating where you want to start looking. And you can get an idea of the altitude. If it's 6,000 foot at the top and 5,000 foot or 4,000 at the bottom, you know, you're going to start looking at the bottom. And you're going to start looking at the ridge tops and the east-facing slopes first, because that's where the morels come first. So all these things, you can actually, if you want to take the time, download this. You can pencil in the areas that are north-facing slopes. They're going to be the best producers. You can pencil in the, get your little felt pens and use all that experience you have with crayons to outline areas that they're worth. And you know, it's something to do while you're waiting for the spring to come. You know, here's another fire that this is a recent fire, and again, you can see just how big an area it is. And if you look at all the little nuances there in the altitudes and aspects, the facings of the various hills, and you can look for creeks and things like that. So they can be very, very useful. Another thing you can get is online that's pretty nice is they give satellite photos, you know, not just the CIA has them now, the Forest Service does too, you know. And the importance of the pre-burn map like this, it's got the outline of the fire, is it tells you what kind of vegetation was there. And you can even go to Google Maps and you can get an idea, is it conifers, is it hardwoods, how heavily forested it is. And those are important details. And you can look on some of this stuff and you can see, if you look over to the right side of the screen there's a lot of this that's more spotty with the tree cover. So you know that doesn't have as much food and it doesn't have as much cover for the morels, so it may be less advantageous. Also, you can get an idea of where the roads are. This one's right along 299, so potentially this could be a pretty good fire. This is one that happened this year, so it could be happening right now. And again, this is kind of going over the aspects that you're going to be looking for when you're looking at one of these maps. The aspects of the fruiting zone, which is the facing. Is it north facing? Is it ridge top? Is it south facing? Is it, you know, what are the aspects there of the spot? And the temperature. There's been some debate about this, but it looks like, in my mind, that soil temperatures have to reach a certain temperature before things start happening there with the morels. And that temperature's right around 50 degrees. I mean, that doesn't mean you can go with your turkey thermometer and you find 50-degree soil and they should be here. Well, it takes a little longer than that. But if you go there and it's 30-degree soil, then there's not much point looking right then. You need to go to someplace that's a little bit warmer. The moisture and the humidity are crucially important, because if it's dry and windy, you're really only going to see morels in very, very kind of secluded, under log type environments. But if it's drizzly and rainy or snowy, they're going to be pretty widespread on open environments where they're trying to get a little bit of sunlight and moisture. So they're definitely going to need, there's some important aspects to moisture and humidity. The other just talking about is host plants. Are you in places that produce good morels? Are they, it doesn't seem like black oaks produce many morels. So if you're in the black oaks, there's not much point. But if you're in the incense, cedar, and firs, and pines, potentially that's a spot that's worth looking at. The time of year sort of ties in with the temperature, because really the time of year is less important than the temperature and the humidity. At higher elevations, things happen much, much later in the season, but we've set up the foray this next weekend, and pretty much out, 4,000 or 5,000 feet, the end of April. It's a pretty good guess in, the middle of Sierras that that's when things are going to be happening. And they can happen a little earlier. You go into, you go down to the valley, and I don't know if you guys saw the Mushroom Talk banner about somebody finding 11 bags of morels. There's a pretty good chance that a lot of the olive orchards and other orchards down right almost at sea level, which the valley is, they come, pretty early in the year. Sometimes it's February, sometimes even January. You hear about pretty good morel harvest there. They've got these basically hardwoods. They're running their little diskers around underneath, destroying the plants and weeds and tree roots that are right at the surface. So there's a pretty good source of fuel there for the morels, and they seem to respond to it once in a while. I've never personally seen it, but I've certainly heard enough about it to think that it's true, at least in our area. Here we go again, the 50 degrees for the ilatas. But the gray morels, which is a different species, they tend to come up when it's a little bit warmer, and it seems like in California we really don't get the rain when it's warm enough. So they're pretty rare to fruit in the Sierras until you get some unusual conditions. I mean, I've seen them at 5,000 feet, seen them at 8,000 feet, but further north where you both got the elevation or the cold temperatures and the summer or late spring rains, they tend to be more common, and they're definitely an excellent morel. Here's some details, that you have to think about. The very high humidity, protection from the wind, aspect of facing, the duration of the moisture, has a lot to do. If it's going to be a fairly damp area, you might get very large morels, and they can be very prolific. It seems like in a lot of these places, there's a relationship between the temperature and drying. So the temperature has to rise, and the fact that the stuff is starting to dry out in the soil tends to drive a fruiting cycle. So you'll see these things when you get the temperature swings up, the air temperature, into the 80s, and you get these massive fruitings in exposed areas. But they're gone in a week or 3 days. We were talking about the host plants that we have in this area. We have pines, so pines seem to be very good. Spruce, we don't have a lot of spruce in California, or at least in this area, but they have a reputation for being good morel things. The black spruce in Alaska is famous. Doug firs and true firs seem to both produce morels fairly well. The dogwoods, we've had pretty good luck under dogwoods. Dogwoods tend to grow in wet areas, and they tend to be in the creek bottoms, so they're very sheltered, but it seems like you find very, very large morels and very prolific under dogwoods when they're dead. Apple is a famous, mostly East Coast, but it sounds like it does happen here occasionally. Elms, everybody's heard of the dying elm trees and fantastic fruitings of morels. The tulip tree is, it seems to support morels in this kind of every spring they come out under the tulip trees, and so people look those out in the native forest there. And there's even been reports of in the grass family, some of the grasses. There was an article that was talking about how it sprayed Roundup on this grass, and they had a giant fruiting morels all around through the grass. So it's just the death of the plant was the setup for the morels. So the suspicion that they are mycorrhizal with certain kinds of grasses. And one of the things that might make you think a site is good, gives you the right timing, it's got the right humidity. These are some of the companions that come up at the same time. And several other ascomycetes. There's Calocyphifulgens up there. It's a very orange, bright orange, but it stains kind of greenish. And there's this nice little wiffle ball that grows in the soil. It's actually completely subterranean until it kind of opens up at the top. And it starts out white and then turns purple on the interior. And it used to be Sarcosypha crassa. That's what you'll see in most of the books. And these both come up right about the same time as the morels. So you see these things and you can start thinking, well, maybe this is the right time. There's snow plants. We just saw it this weekend. And they're just starting to come up like this. This is like the beginning of the morel season. And they're pretty nice because they're so bright red. It's hard to miss them. But they're quite strikingly attractive too. And these are actually a parasite on another fungus that's mycorrhizal with the pines and the firs. And it actually gets all its sustenance from, I think it's a rhizopogon. Ooh, there's a doomed morel. You can see the shadows about ready to die. Yeah, poor thing. But what you can see in this is this is a very low cover situation, but it's got the pine needles that are keeping the soil. And this is kind of a fuels reduction site. And this is from Sunday. And this is at 3,000 feet. So they were only in the warm spots at 3,000 feet.
This was last Sunday?
Yeah. This wasn't last Sunday. But you can see some of the folks that are out there picking morels. And actually the upper right side there, that's a required clothing you must wear for moreling.
Is that a few years ago in MSSF?
That's just say, what's that?
Is that you in early MSSF?
Those morels are immortality mushrooms.
That's true. Yeah, a couple more, they'll just look like that. Yeah, you can see in this is a nice, again, this is David Aurora, and I stole his picture off the web, but without permission. And but if you look back, here's this nice area that's got the burnt trees, a couple fallen trees, and fir needles all over the ground, and kind of looks a little foggy in the background. And you can look at the density of these morels that can come up there. I mean, you can almost fill, just from what he's got there, one of those baskets up like that. And you can see the basket from the East Coast morelers there, and basket from the West Coast morelers. So yeah, they talk about the individuals, we talk about the pounds. Oh! There's last year we were looking for morels, and there was some being guarded there. But again, here's a nice burnt forest, got the nice needles on the ground, and he's kind of invisible there. He was pretty.
So how'd you get them out of the way?
They're edible.
If I was camping, I would have tried.
It's like protein.
Yeah. Oh, that might be it. I guess that was the last one.
Oh.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah.
Do you want the north side, north-facing slope? Depend on how wet and warm it is?
Well, if you think about it, you know, the thing, it's sort of like a time clock. You know, it takes so long at some temperature for a morel to grow, right? So if you look at the east face, when the sun comes up, it shines on the east side of the hill. So that gets warmest the earliest in the day. and it's going to stay warmest the longest. And the same way as if you look at a mountain, the very top tends to get the rays first of the sun, and tends to get hot all day as the sun goes on. So again, the soil is very warm there, relatively speaking. But it dries out really quickly too, because it's exposed to the wind. So the morels are going to come out as soon as they possibly can. But the north face, the sun doesn't shine very much on the north face, so it stays wetter, and the temperatures rise more slowly. So there's an opportunity for things to grow very nicely. You know, it doesn't dry out. Often, because it's moisture, there's better tree cover on the north side too. So that's often where you find your biggest fruitings of morels. And go ahead.
I don't hear much reports of them in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Speak up.
Do you hear much reports of them in the Santa Cruz Mountains?
Yes, I don't think the Santa Cruz Mountains are much different than the Sierras. They're just a little bit lower. They have the same sort of activity. We've had a couple little forest fires down there, and they seem to be pretty productive for morels. And there was 2 years ago, 3 years ago,
Bonnie Dune Fire?
they had the Bonnie Dune fire, and then they had 3 or 4 others around there. And people collected mushrooms, morels at almost all those locations. And you know, they have a good conifer base there, firs and stuff, and they get relatively cold. They get snow sometimes.
You can find the firemen, so they're looking for something like that.
A fireman? Yeah, I sell those. No. Last year's. No. No, actually, there's something called InsaWeb that has fires, and I think Cal Fire. There's another website for Cal Fire that often has them. But you know, often you don't get all the information from those websites. You have to do some interpretive work too. And you can talk to the local ranger districts, and they'll often tell you if they're doing something small in that area. Because sometimes it's nice to have a small disturbance that only you know about. Or you can check, or get a few so you can check the various elevations.
Isn't it true though that it starts sort of in the southern Sierra and kind of works its way north, because morel season in Trinity and Lassen is not until like into May usually?
There's been people that try to quantify some of that stuff. You know, that every 100 miles is like a week or something like that. But it seems like it's so localized. You know, you really can't tell. There was a few years back they had something in Loyalton that happened in the beginning of April. And then there was a fire that was only like 50 miles away, the Microbial fire, and that didn't come in until exactly the time that things were going on in the Sierras. You know, we saw baby little morels there, but it was just too cold for it.
Right.
So I think it's pretty local, you know, and you can't make too much inferences about the exact timing just from any particular altitude or distance north. To my mind, you gotta go. You gotta look.
Now, controlled burns listed anywhere besides those two sites?
I think sometimes the control burns are listed on the InsaWeb, and but sometimes they have them on the. You have to go to the individual ranger district websites, and they talk about fuels reduction and control burns and things like that. Only problem is there's this really kind of Byzantine system of organizing those things. So they propose it one year and you'll see it on the website, and it won't necessarily get done because they have to get funded and they have to get permitted and all that. So you may see a lot of things that are on there that either never happen or don't happen for 5 years, you know. So it can be a little bit daunting. It's, and usually the lower you can get down in the pay grade, talking to rangers, the more information you get. They're not as skilled at obfuscation.
Norm, is it true, I think it was 7, 8 years ago, sitting around a campfire with you and Dave, that you said on the way back you threw lit coals out of your car?
What was that? I didn't hear all the details. I'm sure it's true. If Don says that, it must be true.
What are the best names for the morels in North America?
What's the best name for morels?
Oh,
Morels. I think that's what the Germans call them. No, I think they're just general morels. Seems to be the most widespread usage.
I mean, well, Latin names, like Morchella,
Oh, you mean the genus?
or the species.
Scientific name.
What's that?
He means the scientific.
Oh, scientific name? It's like Morchella. But the species name is, it's gone through so many revisions that I don't think many of us are very confident about putting an actual species name on what we're seeing here. They had, in the latest paper, what was they had? 26 white morels and 16 black morels or something like that in one paper. And another paper that came out that had, I don't know, a dozen or so other names. So I think it's sort of in flux. I don't think they know what they're talking about.
Hey Norm, are there, this is like a one-off question, but because like mushrooms like truffles, some people like to dig for them to harvest them, but morels, we're going to burn morels, you're just cropping through devastation. I mean, so different regulations with those kinds of mushrooms versus truffle or other types?
I guess I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. You're saying that there's mushrooms are always associated with devastation.
Yeah, sometimes I read about it.
I think they're definitely important recyclers. You know, it wasn't actually. There's a theory that the reason the Carboniferous period, the area that the time when the coal was being laid down, ended, was because of the rise of the ability of fungi to digest wood and lignin. So that prior to that, all this carbon was being stored, made these giant coal beds and a lot of the natural gas and petroleum products. Might have been hampered in their ability to store anymore because instead of just piling up, the fungi started to eat them. So in a sense, yeah, they live off devastation.
Any other questions?
Yeah, it sounded like the question would have been, because morel habitats are already so disturbed, are there any kind of protocols for morel harvesting like there would be for truffles, because the habitat's already burnt?
Your concern is for the fungi or for the habitat?
One or the other or both?
I think he's talking about permits.
Regulations on that,
Regulations,
that's different.
no, not regulations, just like, are you doing damage to habitat that's already damaged?
Ethics is what you're talking about. Collecting it.
You know, it's hard to say this. That there's sometimes the Forest Service has been concerned about people walking around and creating erosion. You know, because they're walking around in the fragile soils. But then, later on in the power fire, they put out a kind of a white paper on this whole process. And the reason they were allowing salvage logging was because it broke up the soil surface so that the water didn't run off. So it's not clear that they have a standard or a rational protocol there. Wherever they make things.
Hydrophobic soils.
That is hydrophobic soil. Yeah, we wanted the logging trucks to go in there because they broke up the hydrophobic soil. Yeah, actually, during the fire, it does produce a lot of organic compounds, and they settle out on the soil. So you see that the surface doesn't absorb water that much. Is what they're concerned about, and then it's going to run off. But and
So
you
if
know,
you pick a morel, it'll open a little hole, so.
yeah. Well, you know you're in good morel everything when you start walking around in the soil, and the layer that you're walking on is just like snot, slips. You know, you've got the crunchy layer on the top and then the snot underneath. You know, it's hard to walk on, but it's really good for morels. Okay, well, we'll see you at the camp out